So you want 2 minutes to make it time, wouldn't it? Okay, if we can start finding our seats again, we'll get going. Right. In a minute, I'm going to ask Indu up to the stage. We're just going to have a 2-minute silence for John Goodfellow's prostate, because he's asked me to wait before he comes back and announces the winner of the poster. So, 1 more minute, guys. So before we get going, John will just come up and announce the winner of the poster prize.
Sorry for the delay. We've had a very enjoyable lunchtime looking at the posters, and there's a good selection of posters, and they range from clinical trials to new drugs to quality improvement projects. But we decided, there's only 2 of us, but it was unanimous. It's unusual, actually, Rob, isn't it? We agree on anything, but we agreed. So I'm going to hand over to Rob, who is the South East lead for the Cardiff network, to tell the winners who they are.
I think Jonathan only brought me up here to start to produce some positive input into this meeting today, but it gives me great pleasure within the criteria that our President set us that the congratulation goes to Sarah Finch, Bethan Shires and Anne German's project with regard to the transitional care of the congenital heart disease population between adolescence and adulthood. So I hope you could join me in congratulating the team.
And now we're going to have an update on cardiac surgery by Indu. Indu is the clinical lead for the cardiac surgery service in UHW and also chair of the Welsh Cardiovascular or Cardiothoracic Surgical Society. Okay, Indu.
Good evening, all. It's been a long day, I guess. You probably are all mentally fatigued and very tired. It's not a great day, but it's an important session, nevertheless. The crowd has dwindled, but we shall make the points that we need to. First of all, I'd like to pass on the apologies of my colleagues, all 3 of them who are operating and the other who's doing a clinic, who can't be here. So I'm the sole representative from UHW, and we have 2 surgeons from Swansea. So I'd like to thank Pankaj, Dimitrios and Mark Field, are consultant surgeons, cardiac surgeons at Liverpool, and Pankaj is the lead at Morriston. And it was anticipated that this would be a joint presentation on behalf of all the 3 health boards. So that's exactly what we're going to be doing. Some of the slides will be overlapping with Paul Flint's slides, so I'll probably skim through those, except that I might make a surgical point or 2 with those. First of all, I think, James, thanks very much for the invite, and James had set out what they would like to hear from us in terms of the referral processes, the MDT process, the level of activity for Welsh patients, the current waiting times and waiting list status, rehabilitation, and concerns. The concerns might be clinician-related concerns about the service. So the referral process at UHW, we've got the outpatient referral service. Vast majority of these, possibly between 60 to 70% of this, are direct referrals to surgeons. About 30 to 40, it's a bit ambiguous, that is the percentage that goes into the outpatient pool referral services, and then it gets allocated to different surgeons based on their availability and ease of giving the particular treatment that is needed. The inpatient referrals, again, we've got them in two categories. The routine sort of lower, moderate risk patients who are inpatients get referred to either the inpatient pool or the surgeon who's on call. But many a time, they're also direct referrals to any of the surgeons who may be interested in that particular aspect of surgery. The complex transfers that we have from various hospitals are invariably named transfers under the care of a particular surgeon, but they come through cardiology, and the on-call cardiologist takes over the care, and from there on, the surgeon who's been contacted in the first instance is always involved in the ongoing care and eventually takes the patient to theatre. At Morriston, similar direct pool of referrals as outpatients, again, directly to surgeons, which I believe is about 70% of the cases, or 60 to 70% of the cases, and about 25 to 30% go as outpatient pool referrals, which get allocated. But Morriston does have the system where you have a consultant on call for the week. So that particular consultant picks up all the in-house urgent referrals and plans their surgery. So it's a different system, but it's also something that Liverpool tends to follow. They call them Surgeon of the Week, like I think you guys call Cardiologist of the Week. It's pretty much Surgeon of the Week who takes up inpatient referrals at Liverpool, and their outpatient referral pool is pretty much, again, a distribution between a general pool referral which gets allocated or direct referrals to a particular surgeon. So I'd like to dwell a little bit on the MDT processes, because this is something perhaps that warrants a bigger discussion later. The MDT process at Morriston, Morriston has one MDT every week, and at the discretion of the group, depending on how many TAVI cases need to be discussed or interventional cases need to be discussed, they are distributed within that one session of one MDT, which encompasses both TAVI and PCI and coronary revascularization by surgery. At UHW, we also have one MDT a week. It happens on a Monday, and we've got an allocated time between 1.5 to 2 hours. Well, when I say allocated, we spend about 1.5 hours to 2 hours in the MDT, but this time by no means is protected. So we alternate interventional MDTs with TAVI MDTs, and sometimes, of course, if there are patients who need urgent sort of MDT discussions, those are interspersed. It's by no means written in stone that it is a TAVI MDT or an interventional MDT. What was introduced approximately 2 years ago, and which continues to work extremely well on both sides, as we feel that it does indeed, is the MDT at the Royal Gwent Hospital. Now, the Royal Gwent and Aneurin Bevan is a very big referral base for Cardiff and Wales. So one surgeon goes on a fortnightly basis to Royal Gwent, and we have long discussions, multiple patients, but more importantly, the very complex patients who need a surgeon to cast an eye on them are seen, and a plan is made for them. And what this has avoided is early transfers to Cardiff and Wales, resulting in very, very long waits. So this is basically a saved bed days, and also the patient waiting at Aneurin Bevan gets a very quick surgical opinion. The maximum wait would be a week or so when they know a surgeon is coming to see them. I'd like to now discuss the Liverpool strategy, vastly different from the two Welsh centres. Liverpool has coronary MDTs twice a week, TAVI MDT once a week, aortic MDT once a week, a mitral MDT once every fortnight, and there is a drive or a move by the Society of Cardiothoracic Surgeons to start what's called the high-risk MDT. About 60% of the patients would fall into this category of those whom we operate. So this new high-risk MDT is going to, I understand from Mark that they're going to commence it from January in Liverpool. And very important to note, all MDT time at Liverpool is protected. Undoubtedly, they do about 1,800 cases a year, so it's a lot more than what we do, but equally so, the proportion of allocated MDT time at UHW or Morriston is grossly under-resourced for the needs of the population and the patients that we operate on. All of you are familiar with the Society of Cardiothoracic Surgeons Blue Book. It was offline until very recently and now is available. And all the data that I'm going to show are over a period of 10 years. So we can see the trends with various operations. And as I said before, rather than trawling through all the data, we just like to pick on one or two really relevant things in terms of trends and current day practices. So we perform approximately 36,000 adult cardiac operations in the UK. The maximum ever performed was nearing 40,000 in 2008. So how does Wales and Liverpool compare with this? So the bottom graph in the middle is the UK trends, and on the left is that of Morriston. The middle is UHW, and on the right is Liverpool Heart Centre. So I'm not able to see all the numbers, but as you can see, Morriston has done close to 850 operations in 2008, but since then it's a steadily dropping number, as is the case with UHW, when in 2008 we performed 1,000 operations, but now we struggle to do 700 or 750 operations, although everything is pretty much the same in terms of infrastructure and personnel. Liverpool has had its fluctuations, but they still do really well, performing more than 1,800 odd operations every year. So this is the last 3-year data that was released by the Society, and very quickly to see what type of operations are done and where we stand in terms of performance. All the 3 units have exemplary outcomes. This is for Morriston, and this is for Cardiff and Wales, and that's for Liverpool. So all the 3 centres in question have outcomes which are very, very good. And if I just go back to this previous graph, obviously Liverpool caters to a 2.8 million population, and only a small part of that are our North Wales population. So if we really need to know how many patients from North Wales are being treated at Liverpool, this is the trend over the last 5 years. Approximately 450 patients from North Wales are referred to Liverpool for treatment. Now, these are the mortality trends in the last 10 years as released by the Society. Clearly, there's a consistent decline in the mortality, and the national risk-adjusted mortality for all comers, barring emergency and elective, that's emergency and salvages, so it stands about 2.6%. Now, the graph on the right is exactly the same figures as the left, but I had to plot that to show where ABMU, Liverpool, and university hospitals stand in terms of the national outcomes. So if we look at the CABG trends, I've divided it into 3 different slides. CABG trends in Morriston, CABG trends in the university hospital, and CABG trends in Liverpool. So the trends are a steady downward decline in the number of CABGs that are performed at Morriston. So the numbers of CABGs, isolated CABGs performed, have halved, if not lesser than half, in the last 10 years. On the right-hand side, the graph on the top reflects the elective CABGs, that is first-time elective CABGs coming from home, wherein there is a steady decline. And the graph at the bottom shows or mimics exactly the same pattern, where there is a severe, or rather a significant decrease in the number of isolated first-time CABGs. So how does UHW compare with this? So this is the trend at UHW. Again, pretty much the same. I would like to point out that this blip perhaps is not something we should even take into consideration, because that's when a lot of outsourcing was done. But overall, a steady drop in the number of elective CABGs and urgent CABGs performed in both the South Wales centres. Now, if we look at Liverpool, this is the trend in Liverpool. Liverpool has seen a steady increase in the number of urgent CABGs performed, whereas there is a steady decline in the number of elective CABGs performed. So why do I feel it's necessary to make this point? A, we all understand and we know that our case mix has become more and more complex. The first-time CABGs that are coming through, we've got about 17,000 patients on our database. So if you just look at the entire database until about 3 years ago, or even 5 years ago, only about 8 or 9% of the patients that had previous PCI and then came to surgery. So if you look at the last 3 years, 17% of the isolated CABGs who undergo their first-time procedure have had previous PCI. So the nature of these patients and the complexities they come with have changed tremendously in the last 6 to 7 years. So I think Richard in North Wales said that we should look at things based on per million population, which really gives a better or a more accurate reflection of what the activity should be in that million, be it Wales or South Wales or North Wales. I read a paper from British Heart Foundation a while ago which said what the number of operations should be per million population. So all comers, all cardiac surgery, for 1 million we should be offering about 580 operations. If we talked only about isolated coronary revascularization in the form of conventional surgery, it should be 300 cases per million. So how do we compare with this? Now, if you take, this is Morriston. So Morriston, for assuming that we are including Bridgend in ABMU and that you're catering to a 1.2 million population, well, your cases are coming to Cardiff for a short period of time. So that's why I made it very clear that if you're catering to 1.2 million, then you should be doing 360 CABGs. But you all are doing about 250 CABGs, and that includes everything, elective, urgent. And if you take Cardiff, for the 1.6 million, we should be doing more than 400, about 420 cases, but we're doing less than half of what we require. Liverpool, on the other hand, is pretty equipoised with what is required and what is being done. So why the difference? I mean, what is there that is different in terms of the North Wales population to South Wales population? Is it the current practices? Is it the lack of MDTs for multivessel PCI that is driving this change? This result is pretty stark. I mean, this is less than half of what we should be doing in terms of activity in the Welsh patients per million population. So the other thing we'd like to raise, because there was a lot of TAVI, etc., what are the trends in surgical AVR? You know, clearly the trend with TAVIs is that we're doing more and more TAVIs, but what these graphs actually show is that there's no change. If anything, conventional first-time aortic valve replacements are also on the increase. So if we look at AVRs in the country, right? So there's a steady upward increase, and these are the three centres which are also showing a pretty steady increase, and Liverpool has plateaued there. So the number of AVRs, surgical, conventional AVRs, have not declined. If anything, there's an exponential rise in the surgical AVRs, despite all the centres offering TAVI. So it just means that there's an increased need in the population, and the cases that are coming out are fairly diverse and, you know, benefit from the different forms of treatment. It hasn't been one at the cost of other. So in terms of timing of surgery, we've always seen that there's about a 50% distribution in the timing of surgery in terms of elective versus urgent. There's only a slight variation in the two South Wales centres, but in Liverpool, the elective work is a lot more. It's about 66% versus the 30-odd% of urgent work. Like I said, I think Paul's shown a few of these slides, and this is weekly activity from ABMU. Thanks, Pankaj, for sending this data. Clearly, the red is what we should be doing in terms of planned activity. The blue is what has actually been delivered. So they've done very well there, where a lot more have been delivered than planned, which is a good sign. But overall, the blue line seldom ever meets the red line. So the planned activity versus the actual delivery there is a significant difference all along, and that is the case. Okay, if I just dwell on this for a minute. In terms of pathways, Morriston had about 217 patients on their pathway at the end of the financial year. And I think the slide is particularly relevant with all these component lists that we are talking, weights that we are talking about. If we look at this, number of patients over 36, and I can't say Cardiff is any different, number of patients waiting over 36 weeks, if you total all of them, there are a good 70, 80 odd patients. So when we have the component weights coming, we're going to try and deliver all this within the 12-week period. I think it's a very tall order, and there's going to be a lot of problems in delivery unless all the other issues are addressed as well. So again, this is the RTTs and ABMU. You can see that there's a steady, trend to having 36 or over 36-week waits for surgery. I'm going to skip that because we've seen those with Paul. Cardiff and Vale, I just put the latest slide up. Thanks, Nick, for sending this slide to me. This is the planned versus delivered activity for this financial year. Again, we are struggling to do our cases. We've had a whole load of infrastructural problems, which I will describe in the next few slides. But the trend is the same in terms of the difficulty in delivering for multifactorial reasons in the two units. Once again, as of September, I think we had about 196 patients on our pathway, and again the same trend in terms of people waiting for over 36 weeks. We were very good few months of this year that we didn't have any 36-week breaches, but that wasn't long-lasting, so there were just sporadic months that we actually did not have 36-week breaches. Okay. In terms of isolated CABG activity, which we've already touched upon, for the North Wales cohort, of the 456 patients that were referred in the last financial year, about 42% were isolated first-time CABGs. When I looked at the data, usually when you look at all the centres, the number of isolated first-time CABGs offered in most cardiac centres varies between 48% to as high as 70%. So it basically reflects the caseload. The last 3 years, both Morriston and UHW have ranged between 36 to 38% first-time CABGs. So that again reflects the complexity of the other 65% that we are operating on, and reflects on how many cases can be done as well, because the longer and the one-day cases or all-day cases or the long cases are in the range of 20 to 25%. So that's again the breakdown for the Liverpool cohort. Right. So Liverpool, as I already said, about 35% of their work is urgent work and 65% is the elective work that they do. And what surprised me was they also have a significant number of, well, I don't know whether 8% is significant given what we see at our end, but 8% of North Wales patients wait for over 36 weeks for surgery. And I found that rather interesting because they also clearly have their own problems in terms of meeting their RTTs and the English RTTs. Yes, in terms of emergencies, on an average, about 3% of our operations are emergency operations. I think Morriston had a difficult time last year because they did about 6.1% cases were emergencies. So that's double the number of what we would normally see. So that clearly, again, has an impact on the delivery of cases the following day. Now, James had asked us to speak about concerns, so I thought I should write about concerns from the clinicians first in terms of the actual delivery and what impacts on the delivery. So, having spoken to Pankaj, we've got common themes going around the difficulty in delivering the workload or whatever it is that we have to meet. Infrastructure. I put that first because that's been a major problem in Cardiff and Wales. So since December 2016 to September this year, we have had two cardiac theatres out of action, mainly because of ventilation problems and other problems, and the theatre was not fit for purpose. So Theatre 11, which is one of the theatres, has been completely refurbished, and Theatre 10 is in the process of being released as well. So throughout these 10 months, we've been gypsies on the main surgical corridor, if you like, taking any theatre that has been available and that is compatible for cardiopulmonary bypass in terms of all the electrical attachments, etc., that we need. So it's been a very difficult time for all people involved in delivering surgery, especially for our nursing staff, for anaesthetists and perfusion, having to be at a site different from their own. And when you need some things in an emergency, you're going through the entire length of UHW corridor to bring things. So we have managed to do our very best and use as much of the theatre time that has been allocated. So infrastructure was one big issue. Staffing is the other, and then the ITU and ward beds. So we've got a comparison from Liverpool and from Cardiff. I can, let you know about what Pankaj's thoughts were about Morriston as well in terms of what actually impacts on their delivery. So I'm going to come back to that in a minute. What one has to understand is every Friday we release the schedule for the following week in Cardiff. So we plan the activity on a weekly basis, and that planning takes into consideration availability of staff. So 1,148 sessions are available based on the theatre space that we can use within our operating rooms. So 189 of these are planned cancellations, i.e. as the schedule goes out, theatres are grayed out because we don't have staff. That may be any of the persons involved in the delivery of surgical care. Our problem is lack of scrub staff, which is the main problem. Not to say that others are not issues, but 189 cases get cancelled before the schedule goes out. Now, this, what I feel, is under the radar cancellation. People are only interested, and in England certainly, on the day cancellation of surgery gets reported straight away on a daily basis to the government. I'm not sure how it works here, but 189 cases get cancelled before the schedule goes out, and then after the schedule goes out, we have on-the-day cancellations. So on the day, we've had, this is only for one financial year. So in the financial year 2016, we've had a total of 306 cancellations for various reasons, and let me go there. That's the breakdown. So we've got planned cancellations due to lack of theatre staff, 189. and on the day, because of sickness or having been up overnight for an emergency, etc., another 118 cases have got cancelled. Patients, very difficult to manage, medically unfit patients, last-minute pyrexia, urinary tract infections, etc., which comprise a small number. Surgeon unavailable, inevitable. It's a small unit, 4 surgeons. 2 will be operating, the third will have a clinic and may not be able to take up the space, or if that one surgeon is on annual leave and is the only person who can operate that afternoon, so that session, although we say surgeon unavailable, we give that session to our thoracic colleagues to use the time at that time. We've had some cancellations because of perfusion, but what I really would like to point out is we've had some cancellations because of ITU beds and ward beds. Now, I do understand from Morriston that since their new ITU has been enforced, ITU cancellations are relatively infrequent, but they do have cancellation at source like us, i.e. if you have script staff related cancellations, you're not doing an operation, so the question of a ITU bed, a ward bed, and all the allied things that are needed don't arise. If we were to operate to full complement, if we use every session, very soon ITU will be blocked, or even now we can't transfer our patients back to the ward, and many of them go home from HTU because there's ward problems with discharges, etc., and a lot of social care problems. So that's a snapshot of what the number of cancellations are at UHW. It's fairly embarrassing to be presenting that, but we've been here before, and unless these things are presented, the awareness is not there. So why can we not invest more in our scrub staff? In fact, be over the complement that is needed. If you need a 13.5 full-time complement, well, be 16.5 so that we don't have these problems. In the long run, it's much more economical and cost-effective to have more number of people in the arena rather than just stay fit to numbers. So now I'd like to compare and contrast the same data with Liverpool, right? So now this is for 1 year, Cardiff and Wales. Liverpool sent me the data for 3 years. So in 3 years, they've had 1 cancellation because of lack of scrub staff and 22 cancellations because of lack of ITU beds and so on and so forth. So the total percentage of cancellations at Liverpool is, just going to come back to this slide, ranges between 6% to 7%. It's really something to aim for, and that's where we should be. We are instead in the 33% range in terms of planned cancellations and on-the-day cancellations. Now, I'd like to just go back to this slide. It's a cardiac services audit, but cardiothoracics go hand in hand. Thoracic surgery is all about tier 1 targets because lung cancer need to be operated on 61 days. So what happens when we are dealing with cardiothoracic theatres? Thoracics get priority because we do need to meet the cancer targets and the deadlines. The second thing is not all script staff are trained to be cardiothoracic. We've got a group who only do thoracics. So when those staff are available, you cannot do cardiac operations and you actually get on and do thoracic surgery. So in stark contrast to the cardiac operations that were cancelled in the last financial year, i.e. 306 cases, this is what was the cancellations in thoracic surgery. Most of them were related to either patient being unfit, etc., but they don't mount to more than 65 cases. And very few due to lack of script staff. In fact, I think 7 cases were cancelled because of lack of script staff. So there is that difference in the cohort that we are working with and the skill mix of the script staff. So it's all not gloom. We have done some good things last financial year, but they haven't been carried on again for economical, risk-related, business case reasons. I think I should take the opportunity because Paul is here and, let him know what our thoughts are. We did the first couple of cases of hybrid aortic arch replacements, but there isn't the money for it. So whilst I think that we are looking at new ways of working, and WISC has got medical leads now, and we are really hoping that we can take all these things forward. Things like sutureless valves, hybrid aortic arch replacements need to come into the commissioning fray. It's global that there is an economic deficit or a financial deficit. Finance problems is not an affliction of Wales. It's there in Scotland. I worked in Papworth. I worked in Scotland. It's there everywhere. It's about how we manage those resources. Do we want to just remain a centre delivering bog standard cardiac cases, or do we want to have innovative ways of commissioning where you put aside a quota, a limited quota to say, this is where we are going. These are all tried and tested methods which should stand the scrutiny of Health Technology Wales, etc. So why should we not have those services within Wales? Wales needs to be self-sufficient, and for that, it can't be a clinician's dream or a surgeon's dream. We need the commissioners on board to develop this. And I would say our thoracic surgeons did the first couple of thoracic robotic resections as well. Great for the morale, great for the team. But once they pass through Health Technology Wales and the NICE clinical assessments, we should be looking at implementing it to be self-sufficient in terms of what we offer. Now, with regards to sutureless valves, we don't have funding for it, but because we have efficiency through technology funds, we are really keeping our fingers crossed and hoping to hear in December whether any money is going to be allocated for sutureless valves, because we operate on very high-risk patients who are discussed in TAVI, and whilst we have one extreme of conventional surgery and the other extreme of TAVI, what we do not have is the middle ground where sutureless valves firmly sit, and it can be what the high-risk patient should be needing, not just for isolated aortic valves, but multiple procedure cases to decrease theatre time and cross-clamp times. Angela might be here. First of all, I have to thank our rehab group for providing data on rehabilitation. So I've got data from Morriston and from ourselves. So fine for all of us to do the surgery or the PCI, and but somebody looks after them after all that. And I was staggered because I don't think I ever thought about the numbers our rehabilitation team sees every year. They see over 1,600 cases. And I think that blip of last year being 1,600 perhaps relates to the fall in the number of cases or, the delivery of the cases. But we have about 1,600 patients attending rehab. The uptake is very variable, I understand, from what the two centres have sent in terms of their data. But I just have to go through to Morriston data as well. This is what Pankaj sent, about 534 referrals in one financial year, and that is distributed between cardiology and the surgical uptake or the cardiology uptake post-MI or post-surgery is about 55%. So in conclusion, I would say that there are similar trends in the referral practices in all the three centres catering to the Welsh population. The MDT processes are very variable. The two South Wales centres are very poorly resourced for MDTs, and that is something that should be addressed. And we can look up to Liverpool because they have quite a robust system, and there is some work that needs to be done in terms of the MDTs that are done in the two centres in South Wales. The outcomes are excellent, and but we don't want to concentrate on what is excellent and all the time harping on about our outcomes being excellent. What we are not excellent at is delivering what we need for the Welsh population. We are a far cry behind where we should be in terms of what patients can access within these two centres, and therefore I think infrastructural issues and staffing issues must be addressed for us to be able to deliver what we need. I think another point that is food for thought is the progressive and a steady decline in the number of CABG operations performed between Morriston and Cardiff is a cause for concern. What does it really reflect is something that we should all analyze. And I think the other thing I would say is, if anything, people can rest assured that TAVI is not overtaking conventional surgery, or one is not at the cost of other. There is an exponential increase in the aortic valves and a steep decline in the number of CABGs that must be analyzed by both the centers. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. It was a very thought-provoking presentation. Any questions in the room? Perhaps I'll start then, Indu. You've talked about cancellations. Clearly this is a huge problem and it's one part of the system falling apart down, but the point to make is that the rest of the system is still there, financed and paid for, just not utilised, which I guess explains Paul's slide about why we're not meeting our funding capacity because of one part of the jigsaw not being there. What solutions might there be to improving that? Just on the end there.
Thanks, James. I think we've analysed the causes of cancellations repeatedly. There's work that needs to be done on a staffing level, and recruiting to cardiothoracic services is not easy. It's not everybody's cup of tea. The nurses have very, very long and intense hours. Their remuneration drops considerably when they move from a general theatre to cardiac theatres, and that's because they're no longer on the shift system and they're on on-call system. So several of the nurses that we have trained have actually left the jobs after training when they've come to a point where they can independently scrub for more standard procedures because of the drop in the pay that they have to take, and of course the work is very intense. So recruitment and retention has been one problem which I think the health boards are trying to address. The second and the very difficult problem is infrastructural problems. UHW is an old hospital, and we've heard this morning as well, the amount of investment that is needed to bring theatres up to scratch is phenomenal. So it's, I think, beyond even the remit of the health board. This is at a Welsh Assembly level that needs to be, to have 2 cardiac operating rooms out of action for a period of 10 to 11 months is staggering, but that's what has happened. So the infrastructure issues are very complex because of financial reasons. The recruitment and retention needs really leadership in trying to make some bonus for these people, scrub staff, to stay within cardiothoracics. We can also work on revamping, because we are small groups, it's very difficult to revamp the group that we, in a year we lose about 10 sessions because there's no surgeons. That's quite difficult to address because the group is small, but we have been trying to see if we revamp outpatient days, whether we can cut this down as well. Medically unfit patients as a cause of cancellation, I think it's something that we will be coming back to all the referring hospitals, because there are a lot of things that the referring hospitals can do, because a lot of times when the patients are transferred, they've come in but they're pyrexial or they have a UTI, and then they come, because there've been no ward beds, they come on the night preceding surgery, and then we find that they are pyrexial and we can't bring anybody in last minute, and that becomes a wasted slot. So we've had 22 of those in the last year. It's more difficult to address, but it's not impossible.
Thank you. Pankesh.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment, actually. Can you just have a slide to do with those red, blue, and the black lines, please?
Which, the weekly ones?
Yeah, either the ABM
Guys, it doesn't really
matter.
Can we have the slides back up?
Okay, so what I wanted to do is I wanted to comment about this work. It's working now. So what I wanted to do was to make some comments about this flow chart, which we sort of collectively formulated about 4 years ago. So all the WISC data now gets reported in this format. And in fact, there's another line on top of all of this, you know. So if you see these lines, the red line, the blue line, and there's a black line which runs above it as well. And the reason why I think it's important for the collective wisdom here to understand is that the black line at the top, you can hypothetically sort of say you run 2 cases per theatre per day, 50 weeks a year, will give you 20 cases a week. In Morrison's case, will give you 1,000 cases. We've never done more than 750 to 800 cases. Below the black line, you drop onto a red line, which is the planned delivery, and that is largely to do with staffing levels. If you don't have perfusionists, if you don't have scrub staff, if you don't have anesthetists, you cannot run a cardiac theatre. You know, it requires a big team. And the blue line is very much an operational issue. There's no point in scheduling 2 long cases. Everybody knows we're not going to get done. So I would never expect the blue line to outrun the red line. The reason why they outrun is because you've done too many emergencies overnight.
Correct.
That's the very simple explanation. So in terms of trying to get these lines to follow each other, which is what, Paul, you're after about sort of wasted resources, it is a real challenge. I think, some of the case mix in South Wales is very skewed. We do fewer isolated procedures compared to the rest of the UK. More of our procedures are combined procedures, which means that a higher proportion of our days operating are taken up by single case days. And therein lies one of our fundamental problems, that although you may think we can do 20 cases a week, even if you had everything, in reality you will probably only do 13 to 14 cases. And then, you can try to marry up as best as you can. You do it on a Friday, we do it on a Thursday. It's the same principle. In most of the cardiac units, it's undertaken a week prior to that. In terms of, how you try to maximize the resources that you've got available to deliver your sort of procedures. Infrastructure is a big problem. You've got sort of issues at the moment running through your theatre infrastructure. For a long time in Morriston, we had an issue with our intensive care unit. I've been there since 2006, up until September last year when our new ITU opened. So it took 10 years plus, 11 years nearer. We never had enough ITU beds. Solution to all problem was a new ITU bed. Well, ITU bed, I put it to everyone, that is just a smoke screen. There are other things, barriers which hide behind that, and it's just becoming apparent. So scrub staff, is a national problem as far as cardiac scrub staff are concerned. There are measures put into place. Yourselves have got yours through the recruitment and retention package. There's a plans afloat in Morriston as well at a much advanced level now. We expect it to be ratified very shortly, and that addresses the salary that the scrub staff are paid to come and work in cardiac theatres. If you look at the national benchmarking data through the NCBC, we have got the highest proportion of band 5s in the country servicing cardiac theatres.
Correct.
Nowhere in the rest of the country would a cardiac scrub nurse be paid band 5 basically, except in Wales. So that there are real infrastructure issues, because I think the challenges faced in cardiac theatre are not being recognized, or not were being recognized where cardiac theatres were sitting. And I think some of the sort of responsibility needs to rest with the 2 respective health boards exec team to deliver that, and that's where we need your support, Paul, really.
I think you've made very important points. It's important to point out to everybody, we've shown cancellations, but whatever cardiac theatres are allocated, there is 95% usage of cardiac theatres. If you look at the general stream, it varies between 50 and 70%. So the highest usage rate once you have an operating room is by the cardiothoracic surgeons. And I don't think the blue and the red lines tally anywhere in the country. So the expected numbers and the actual numbers performed may go parallel with the actual numbers being below, but they don't marry up at any point in time. I think Gethin wants to make a point.
Thanks, Inda. Really enjoyed your presentation. We've heard similar concerning data about cancellations, and you've given a very honest appraisal, as is Pancras. It occurs at both sites. In your summary slide and the cases you made, would a larger single cardiothoracic centre answer the infrastructural workforce issues, the access to MDT? It's there. It's got to be discussed, guys.
That's a really difficult question to answer. We had a similar question in the thoracic surgical consultation this morning, but Gethin, we have to remember when Swansea was opened in 1997, it was after exhaustive consultations about how many centres there should be in Wales. So if we go around saying, well, we can do with one cardiac centre, it's backtracking, and I honestly don't know. The fact that we have one cardiac centre isn't going to change any of our existing problems, because what sort of contracts staff are issued doesn't depend on whether they're in one centre or two centres. It just depends on what the national policies are. So somebody has to wake up to the problems that are faced by people who work within the cardiothoracic setup. It is a different beast to deal with. We all like to think we are different, but it is genuinely different for theatre staff to deal with. And I'm not sure that having one single centre, because we are not able to address infrastructural problems in two centres, is really the answer. The answer is to beef up both centres. Swansea and Cardiff have this lowest number of ITU beds. I don't know about Swansea now. I might be a bit wrong here. But to have 8 or 9 ITU beds for this population is something that is unheard of. Once upon a time, Stoke used to be the one with the smallest ITU or lowest number of ITU beds, but they have changed. They've got a new ITU, so we rank amongst the lowest in number of ITU beds for the case mix that we do and for the numbers that we do. I don't think I've answered your question because it's too complex a question to answer. Yeah.
Very good try.
Identify where the gaps lie, and once you know, I mean, I give you scrubs example, is just one example. It's very easy for us to sit and say, well, we haven't got scrub staff, we haven't got scrub staff. The reality is, even if I gave you scrub staff, it'll be something else. So we've expanded our ITU, okay, we've got 12 beds in the ITU. It has taken 12 months of very focused recruiting, and we still don't have enough staff to run the ITU. And, you cannot get trained critical care staff to run the intensive care beds. You can't get trained scrub staff unless you invest some resource up front in recruitment and, more importantly, retaining them afterwards. So, we've had 3-phase recruitments into our ITU, taking on somewhere between 8 and 9 staff each time. And we're still probably about 10 or 12 staff short from getting our ITU utilized. And it's not that you can just sort of grab them from a tree. Somebody was talking about money growing outside. Oh, Paul, you were talking about money, growing outside the tree, the whisk of it. We just can't get them. And it is a national problem. And I think if you look at all the models of mergers, that have happened, unless you've got a purpose-built brand new centre, we'll be worse off. Because the recruitment, you will still need the same number of scrub staff, you will still need the same number of theatre staff. So I think it requires focused attention to get them on board and then to keep them.
Okay, great. Well, I think we'll end the session there, and it just comes to me now to thank you all for coming today. It's been a very interesting talk, and I'm sure a lot of people have heard some things that they found useful and will take away with them. I'm not just looking at you, Paul, but you've been told. Okay, thank you very much, everybody.